So if we've dismissed Shoshenq as the pharaoh who plundered the Temple of Solomon, it's my job to come up with the real Shishak, is it not? Because I don't believe you can knock something down without rebuilding it. So this is my reconstruction. And you're going to be shocked now when you read that subheading. Was Rameses the Great, Rameses II, the biblical Shishak? Suddenly, Yul Brynner, playing Rameses, is no longer an adversary of Moses, Charlton Heston. He's now become the guy who took the golden shields from the temple. Is that even remotely possible? Well, it is. And it's all about a name, which I'm going to go into now for you. So now we're going to get into really complicated linguistic arguments. This is a tablet, clay tablet, that was found in Turkey at the capital of Hattusa of the Hittite Empire. You know, the Hittites are mentioned in the Bible. Now, it just so happens that in year 5 of Rameses II, he fought the most famous battle in ancient history against the Hittites. It's called the Battle of Kadesh. Kadesh being in North Syria and the Orontes River. And about 15 years later, after a lot of fighting, the Hittite emperor and Rameses decided to make a peace treaty. They said, no more fighting. We're going to be buddies from now on, and we're going to protect each other if we have any trouble. Well, this is the Hittite version of that treaty. It's also recorded on the walls of Karnak in hieroglyphics. Now, this is something you have to understand. Just like Hebrew, Egyptian language does not have any vowels written, okay? So just consonants. So when you read a name, you should not expect, in Egyptians, you will not see the consonants within that name. However, the language of the Akkadian language that the Hittites used to record on this treaty, and they use for all their diplomatic correspondence, is a syllabic language, not a consonantal language. So they do sound the vowels. So you get groups of letters, ta, mi, da, mu, nu. Those are all little syllables with vowels. So when they record the name of Rameses on this tablet, saying Rameses signed this treaty with King Hattusilis III, you actually get the name Rameses written in cuneiform Akkadian. And you can read that with the vowels. Okay? Now you're going to get a shock, because you think he's called Rameses, don't you? He's not. Rameses is the Greek version of his name. It's not actually the name that it was pronounced in Egypt or anywhere else in the ancient world. So you're now going to learn what his name really sounded like. Well, the first part of his name, because he has two names, he has a birth name and a coronation name. So the coronation name comes first, and his birth name comes second. You see it in two cartouches. We Egyptologists, we have something called Egypto-speak. It's a sort of way we communicate with each other, so we can refer to these things in our own way. And what we do is we insert the letter E wherever we don't know the actual value of a vowel. So we go Uzamatre Setepenre. That's his coronation name. But on this treaty, it doesn't sound like that at all. It sounds like Washmuria Shatapnaria. That's actually how it sounded to the clerks, the ambassadors, when they wrote down the name of Rameses as they heard it in ancient Egyptian. Washmuria Shatapnaria. So Uza Matre is Wash Uza, Mua Mart, Ria is Ra or Re. Shatapnaria is Setepenre, so we call it Setepenre, but Shatapnaria. So when you get to the ancient language, you can start to learn a lot more about the reality of the language and the reality of the names of these people. And we'll do this with Joseph later as well. So then his birth name, Rameses Meriamun, as we say, is Riamashisha Miamana. So Amun in ancient Egyptian is really pronounced Amana. As we know, Ra is Ria. Mash is the same as Moshe in Hebrew, born of. And Shysha, the end of that name, is very important, because in the ancient world, nobody was going to go, every time they wanted to speak about this king, Washmura Shatapmaria Riamashesha Miamana. It was too much of a mouthful. So they gave him a nickname. We call it a hypochoristicon. What that means is a short form of your name. I'll give you an example. Timothy and Tim. Lady Di, Princess Diana. some people say Dave for David. We all have these short form names. They're not like a nickname like Shorty or Blondie or Fatso. They're short forms of the name, and it's very commonly used today without realizing we use these hypochoristicons. Well, the ancient world was no different. The ancient world was exactly the same. Kings were called by short form names. It just so happens that Rameses had a short form of his name, which was used all over the Levant, in Syria, in the Holy Land, and in Egypt. The common folk, the ordinary folk, gave him a short form of his name. And it's based on that. They called him Shysha. Are you starting to smell Shishak in that? But hang on a minute. What happened to the kof, the K, at the end? Why is there no K, as in Shishak? Well, here we have a little conundrum for you. Let me show you the development of two letters from the Hebrew alphabet, right from the very beginning of the development of the original alphabet that we use today. Here we see two letters. We have the Q, the Kof, and the Wav, the W. And going back through time, through Hebrew, Greek, Paleo-Hebrew, Phoenician, right the way back to something called Proto-Sinaitic. Now, later on today, I'm going to take you to a turquoise mine in Sinai, where we find the first evidence of the Hebrew alphabet in use in ancient Egypt, developed out of the hieroglyphs by one genius. And you'll find out who he is later. But in that particular case here, we have a sign which crops up over and over again, this one. You see it coming? We call it the lollipop. What do you call the lollipop? Popsicle, is that right? Over here?
Tootsie Pop.
Okay, that'll do. So look at that sign appears in both the letter Wav and the Kof. But in time, it evolves. So, in the 15th century, in Proto-Sinaitic, in Sinai, it's a Wav. So this lollipop is a Wav.
And this is an older time period. In other words,
So what do you mean?
you're coming from 15th century BC.
This way,
Yeah,
towards
so,
the present.
Yeah, so this is the older on the right hand
This is the
side.
oldest one.
Yeah.
Then when we get to the 8th century BC, the lollipop has shifted up and now has become a Kof. Okay? Now, what happens between the 15th century and the 8th century? Well, that's where Shishak is located, just after the death of Solomon, in the 10th century. So which sign are we looking at? The scribe sees this sign, and he doesn't know whether it's a Wav or a Kof. So our first clue is this Isbet Sata Ostrakon is an alphabet, an abecedary. You can see the letter Aleph here, Tav at the end. This is the first time we see the alphabet written in the 9th century. It's a schoolboy's practice piece on a piece of pottery. And here we have a Resh, and here we have a Kof, okay, in the right position within the alphabet. So we know in the 9th century, the lollipop represented the Kof. Okay? So 9th century, this is the time after Solomon. This is now the divided monarchy period. If a scribe came across that letter, he would read it as Kof. Okay? Go back to the time of Rameses II and the city of Lachish, stratum 4, you get this inscription. Again, reading Bostraphaedon, so that direction, and then this direction. And here, you will see the letter is a Wav. So we have clear evidence that in the time of Rameses, this letter represented, the lollipop represented a Wav, and in the time of the divided monarchy, it became the letter Kof. So there's a Wav, and it's the 12th century BC. On no revised chronology here, this is the date for Rameses and the conventional scheme. So there's our two symbols from the two sources. Are you struggling to find a difference? It's like if we take this symbol in our modern alphabet. If you don't take it in context, you can't read what that is. But if I put the three contexts it might be a capital I in the word identical. Or it might be a lowercase l in the word letter. Or it might be the number 1 in 1,000. It all depends on context as to how you read that stroke, that vertical stroke. So we have the same problem with Wav and Kof, except it's in a name, and a name doesn't have a context. So you can't tell which it is. So here is the name Rameses, is short form name, Shysha. This Wav here in hieroglyphs is a vowel marker. You don't know the value of the vowel, it could be anything, but we believe from the Hittite inscription that it's an A. So Shysha and Shishak, without the vowels from the Bible. There it is written in Proto-Hebrew, Sin Yod, Sin Wav. And here is Shishak, Sin Yod, Sin Kof. Can you tell the difference? So, let's say for argument's sake, in the time of Josiah, when they found the sacred scroll in the temple, and they read it out to the people, that the scribe, who eventually wrote down the name as Shishak and vocalized it Shishak, had an older document where the word was really Sisa or Sisu with a Wav. And that's where the K comes from. So we have a mistake in the reading because of the change of the sign from Wav to Kof, which is why Shysha becomes Shishak. So in fact, Rameses II in his Hypercharistikon, known in Israel as Shysha, is Shishak of the Bible, plunderer of Solomon's temple. That is the big mistake in chronology. Because now we're in a situation where everything was tied to that link between Shoshank and Shishak, and Rameses was assigned to Moses. Everything was out of kilter because what we had wrong was we identified the wrong king who plundered the Temple of Solomon, and in fact it's Rameses II. So no longer is he the bad, he's no longer the bad guy. Are you all right?
Steve, I'm sorry. It must be the dust from Rameses got it in my
probably.
nose, yes.
So now we've got a situation on our hands where everything in the timeline is now floating. We have now a chance to see how it really fits together. And that is the key to understanding how the mechanism that leads to the film works. None of this is in the film. You don't get this in the film because it's too complicated to put on a big screen.
Well, here's the thing from a filmmaking standpoint, because this idea is, many people will say, radical, blasphemy. This is not part of our orthodoxy. And yet David, as he continued to defend his ideas, they continued to make sense. And some people said, well, they make too much sense, so they can't be right. I guess in the academic world, if it makes sense, it can't be right because everything else, doesn't make sense. So
the expression they use is, it's too good to be true.
Too good to be true.
Have you heard that one before?
But I have to tell you that there are other examples of evidence for the biblical narrative showing up earlier, like the 104th Psalm, I believe. Is that correct?
Psalm 104.
Yep, Psalm 104 shows up earlier, and it's attributed to Akhenaten.
Correct.
And because of that, what they are saying, even at Christian universities, is that the Bible gathered its sources from a variety of places. And
David nicked it from Akhenaten is what they say,
yeah,
to put it politely.
And
instead of it being the creation of David and then Akhenaten borrowed it from David, because in this timeline you're going to see working out here, and it's going to be in one of the later films, is Akhenaten is actually contemporary with David. So the two of them are reigning at the same time. Psalm 104 comes into Egypt as the hymn to the sun, and you have the two at exactly the same time period.
And what did Akhenaten do? What did he say? There was only one?
He said there was only one God. And so he gets labeled by historians as the first monotheist. Okay? But with this revised chronology, everything goes back to normal. Moses becomes the first monotheist. And Akhenaten is the copier, not the originator.
And David, wouldn't you say that what you were suggesting too is that the problems aren't necessarily, he didn't start with the Bible. He just basically ended up saying, well, how did this impact the biblical narrative? What he started with was that Egypt has pharaohs, the whole dating of the pharaohs and things were out of place.
My PhD thesis was on the third intermediate period.
Right.
It had nothing to do with the Bible at all.
But he just then said, well, what are the other communities that this affects? And then all the other patterns started to show up. And so as a filmmaker says, am I going to make a film that's dodgy, as you would say?
Dodgy.
Yes. I said, well, let's look and see how dodgy this really is. And actually, there is a sequential pattern, and we've only showed you part of it. There's a lot more to the patterns. And what I would say is that I'm going to say you have to make up your mind. We're going to show you strong evidence, and then the evidence and the Bible, you can think about that and make your own decisions. And that releases everyone from us saying, well, this is exactly this or whatever. But it makes too much sense to me as a filmmaker I mean, I couldn't make a film if it wasn't something there. You can't write a story and you can't look at these things. We're not doing smoke and mirrors here. And like Brian Wood said, I didn't plant the evidence in the ground. You can't do that. All you can do is interpret it. And so what his interpretation is does make sense. And that's the reason why I felt that you needed to know. Otherwise, right?
Yeah, it's not just that though. I mean, for me at least, and I would have thought for most people, normal people, isn't this exciting to be able to re-examine all this stuff and try and piece it together? Why are these archaeologists and historians so scared of it? We're going to wind up very soon, but I just want to show you why Rameses is the key to all this. Now, it's all about this thing called the Israel Stealer. Have you heard of that?